Hi, I'm John Drake, and I just want to quickly share some ideas I had. Okay, alright, I'm just going to make this video. It's probably not going to be amazing, but I've been thinking about it for a while, and I've been wanting to make this video. Basically in response to Hasanabi, I've been watching quite a few of his videos. They're very entertaining. I think it's good that he makes the videos he does because it encourages the conversations that we're basically having now with me responding to it. It can sometimes be frustrating to see someone that's not as educated on a specific subject spout or say their opinions which are not backed by sufficient evidence and sufficient facts. But it's good that they do that because then it actually creates a conversation. I kind of feel compelled to respond and contribute to that discussion because of the videos he makes. So I do think it's good that he's making them, and I have nothing against the guy personally. I think he's really entertaining. It's just that I think he does get some points wrong, and I actually used to share some of his viewpoints like years ago, maybe while I was still at uni studying. But I actually studied international business management, and that kind of covered economics a little bit and a little bit of finance. But luckily after that, I was able to get a career in the finance field. So then I was able to learn a lot more about some of the concepts that I think he's lacking. And I think it kind of points to a bigger issue, which is that what I found is that basically he's very well versed in the field of politics, and he has a deep understanding of political theory, I think sociology, and that's political science, and communications is what he studied, which makes sense. But I think one issue is that politics is so closely intertwined with economics and finance that they shouldn't be separate disciplines. Almost like you should have a sufficient education in economics before studying politics, or before being able to graduate as a political science major. So that being said, I think that's just something that we probably should consider in terms of education. There are some fields that are just too closely related that we shouldn't separate them out like that to that extent. Okay, so the first point that he brings up a lot, and this is Karl Marx's kind of sticking point, is one of his theories, is that profit is basically just stolen value. Which actually, it's quite a simple idea, and it makes a lot of sense when you first think about it. Essentially, it's the idea that a business owner is employing, say, 5 employees, paying them whatever amount. Then he charges for the service that those employees created, or the product that the employees created. He just sits there, does nothing, collects a certain amount of money, gives maybe half to the employees and half he keeps himself, right? So he's basically stolen the value that the employees actually generated on their own without him doing any inputs. Now, this does kind of make sense if you, as I said, on a shallow sort of surface level, it does make sense, and it is, it does stick, and that's what I used to believe as well. But essentially, what you have to consider is there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how money actually works, and it kind of ties into the concept that money should be distributed evenly. Whereas what's actually happening is that there's a transfer of risk, capital risk. Our currencies are not backed by a limited finite resource like gold as they used to be, right? Because essentially what would happen before is if you had enough capital, you would just hoard it. You would just basically keep it in a literal casket maybe, or under your bed or something, because that would be the best decision for you to make, right? Because what would happen is that money, is that gold, as it's precious and limited, is going to go up in value anyway. Why would you start a business? Why would you pay employees? Instead, what you would do, and this is what the feudal system and how it worked is essentially you'd own a bunch of land, you'd get slaves to work on it, who were just needed food and needed a place to live, and you would provide them that, and they would just work on that land and produce food, and you would just try to accumulate more money in that way. The capital system is completely different because it treats money not as a finite resource, but more as a unit of measurement, like a metric. You can kind of think about it as like inches or feet, right? Not literal feet, but like the distance, miles. Like when you're building a skyscraper, you never say, oh, we've run out of inches. You might have run out of bricks, you might have run out of cement, but you don't run out of inches. There's infinite amount of inches. So to have the most advanced society, the most advanced economy, where people are producing valuable outcomes and are able to consistently buy valuable products and services, you need to incentivize people that own capital to actually put it at risk. And why would they risk it? Well, they have an incentive, which is profit, right? And you want to make it as safe as possible for them to put that, so reduce that risk as much as possible by reducing crime, reducing theft, reducing uncertainty, and that way they're able to be more incentivized to put more and more of their capital at risk. That way that capital is actually being used, people are doing work, people are producing valuable things, and it starts a positive feedback loop. The other thing you want to do in that society as well is make it as safe as possible to spend money and as easy as possible to spend money. Money makes the world go round, right? The more money sits still, the less people have to do and the less valuable outcomes are being produced and bought and used. Money is just a way to get people to produce valuable things. Actually, the way it's currently designed, and it makes a lot of sense, is that it should not actually be evenly distributed, because what would happen is if you, let's say McDonald's, right? McDonald's is multiple hundreds of billions of dollars, I think, at this point. And say you take all of that money, you sell it out to the investors, right? You raise that capital, you turn it into liquid cash, and then you pay the employees all of that money. You just distribute it all evenly. What happens is those employees are not going to be incentivized to continue to work for the same salary or the same amount of money that they once were before, right? If you suddenly give every McDonald's employee 100,000 US, right, and you deposit it into their bank account, and then you say, hey, can you spend 8 hours today, making these burgers for people, and I'll pay you $100 or $10 an hour. They'll be like, hell no, why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense, because they already have 100,000 US that they could potentially invest into something else and generate a higher interest rate than would make sense. Or they could just kind of chill for a year or two and just go on a beach, sip pina coladas, right? So basically no one would do work for the amount of money they're currently doing it for if it was more evenly distributed. What would then happen to the products and services? Well, a cheeseburger, instead of costing you like $2-3, would cost you like $50, $100, right? And then you would just have insane amounts of inflation, and then the economy would halt again. So what you need is a few people that are able to allocate capital, a few organizations, and you have to be able to incentivize them to allocate that capital effectively to produce valuable outcomes, while also being able to capture profit in order to keep a reserve in case of any contingencies. Say like a pandemic hits, right, and McDonald's have to shut down for like 6 months. Well, does that mean they should go out of business forever and we'll never have McDonald's again? Now, it might not be a good example because people say McDonald's is unhealthy, but just think about it as a food generating source, right? They need capital reserves in order to be able to cover off any periods of downtime and any risk. Otherwise, any time that, like, if employees could capture all of the value, then literally anytime there's a downturn or there's not enough sales, the whole business would just collapse. Now, the last point, which is that billionaires should pay higher taxes. What people don't understand about billionaires is that they don't have billions of dollars just sitting around. And that's amazing. Like the only billionaires that are actually bad for society are the ones that hoard their wealth in actual cash, right? Like, for example, Pablo Escobar. That cash that's been printed is just sitting there and is not being utilized by anyone. Whereas, for example, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they don't have that amount of money just sitting around. That money is in digital form, right? And it's floating around and being used by all sorts of people and banks to provide loans. Billionaires don't have all that money. It's that money that they purportedly have is actually just a measure of the wealth of the companies that they've typically created or helped to create. So, and that's a really important point, right? Elon Musk's wealth, for example, as currently it's said to be 300 billion US dollars. The most annoying thing is when you see those videos where it's like they're stacking up. They show you like a comparison. Maybe I can show it in this. They're showing you like a comparison of how much money each person has, and then they show it in physical terms where it's easier for you to visualize it. And when you visualize that, you're like, oh my God, you know, some of this money should be given back to these poor people so they have a little bit more. They don't actually have that much money. No one has that much money in physical cash. What they have is assets that are valued at that if someone were to buy them. Now, what that means is that their money is actually not in their pocket. It's going around society. When a bank has enough capital, then it lends it out to like multiple other parties, right? They don't just leave it there, right? So that money, the more it's flowing around, the better, as I've already discussed. What you want is to be able to incentivize people to own assets and own value producing things rather than just leaving that money or hiding it away somewhere. No one man should have all that power, right? Kanye West. The thing is, and this is an argument that's sometimes made, that one person shouldn't have the ability to allocate that much capital. But the alternative to that is basically just letting the government do that, which is essentially just other people. The government is just made up of people who got elected into that position. And sometimes the case is made that they should be the ones to be allocating the majority of that capital. But if you look at how effective the government is at allocating capital versus private enterprise or private individuals, you'll see that they are far, far less effective, especially when you compare trying to achieve a certain goal. So for example, Elon Musk, again, I'll use him as an example because he's the most prominent one. He was super passionate about rocketry, space travel, getting to Mars. NASA had spent tens, maybe hundreds of billions of US dollars of government money as a government organization to fund space research and rockets, right? But they couldn't make them reusable. Now, you could say that the government should take Elon Musk's money and maybe then they could achieve it. But what happened was that one passionate person with constrained resources was able to create innovations that otherwise would never have happened because he was able to allocate that money from his previous business venture of selling PayPal, right? That never would have happened if billionaires weren't allowed to exist or weren't allowed to allocate capital. So the more billionaires, the more effective billionaires we have that are passionate about certain projects and are allocating their capital effectively, the better it is for the rest of society. If Steve Jobs couldn't raise the capital to create the iPhone, all of us have smartphones right now. None of us would have them if that wasn't possible, if we just left it up to the government to keep on advancing computers, iPhones, rockets, electric cars, websites, shopping services, social media, etc., etc. We have all of these incredible things because of private enterprise and because people were able to allocate their capital effectively, right? So the worst thing that you would possibly do for all of society is if you suddenly said that now billionaires do pay taxes when they sell their assets, right? Once they realize those gains, then they can pay taxes, right? Well, the worst thing you would want to do is make them pay taxes on things that they haven't even sold yet, right? So if Elon Musk, before he even sells his Tesla stock, the government's like, hey, we're just going to take 50%, right? And they've set a precedent for doing that. What all the other billionaires would then do is they'd be like, wait, let me just withdraw my money and hide it away somewhere, because it's going to get taxed anyway. Why the hell would I just keep it here? You know, generating value for other people and not actually having it. I would just literally maybe put a lot of it in cash, put a lot of it in like gold, and just hold that, literally just hoard it, and then no one could use any of that capital and it wouldn't provide anything valuable for people or society. So the idea that billionaires shouldn't exist, or that there should be a cap of billionaires, like say there was a cap, you can only get 10 billion, anything above that the government takes. You would just take 9 of those 10 billion, you would hide that somewhere, right? Or put it get like physical gold or something, hide that, and then make another 9 billion, hide that, and then you would literally be hoarding cash like the people are currently imagining is happening, which is actually not happening, specifically because billionaires don't have to pay taxes on the assets that they haven't yet sold, right? What you want to incentivize is them to actually not pay any taxes for as long as possible, because what that means is they're not hoarding that wealth. It's being used and moving around society. Billionaires are basically just people who allocate capital effectively. They're able to minimize their risk effectively. They're able to produce products or services. Usually those products or services are good, right? Sometimes they're not, but that's a separate topic, right? Sometimes people do the wrong thing in order to gain capital or gain wealth, and that should be prevented as much as possible, because again, it's in the interest of the capitalistic society or capitalistic government to minimize faulty products, faulty services, so that people are incentivized to spend, right? And people are as healthy as possible and as happy as possible, because it makes sense for then increasing capital and increasing labor force and more effective labor force. The more wealth disparity we've had, the better off everyone has been in general. If there's 2 of us and we're living on an island, right? And I make $50,000, you make $100,000, and suddenly we both, the wealth disparity is 50,000, 50 minus 100, right? Now let's say next year our salary increases by 10 times the amount, okay? And now I make 500,000, but you make $1 million every year, right? What's happened is the gap between us has increased by tenfold as well. It's now $500,000, but what I don't realize is that I'm $500,000 richer anyway, because I can still buy products and services that are worth $500,000 minus, the inflation rate, which is like 2% or whatever. So the more wealth inequality, the bigger wealth gaps we have, the better off society actually, and it's a bit counterintuitive, but the better off society is, because we have more and more products and services that are way higher value than we would have otherwise been able to have. So the way to minimize wealth inequality is just take wealth away from everyone, and don't let anyone create anything. And that's not really an effective way of doing it. Now, there are obviously so many downsides to this, which most of them are just like embedded in human nature. It's people that want to just capture value by any means. that might make products that are not effective or that are not good, but claim to be, and can capture value that way. But at the end of the day, overall, there is no better system that we have right now. So the best system we have is the current one, with also laws embedded into it where you're not allowed to do certain things. You're not allowed to sell snake oils. You're not allowed to make false claims, false advertising. So laws that address specific manipulations and abuses of this capitalist system, but not overhauling the system, because overhauling the system doesn't work. There's no other way that has ever worked. Whenever you try to implement communism or Marxism, what ends up happening is basically the only way to seize the value from those billionaires that you see as oppressors is through sheer violence and force. And the entire society crumbles because essentially no one is able or willing to work for an amount of money that makes sense and actually creates enough of a reserve to protect against risk and unforeseen consequences. And no one is willing to risk their own capital. When somebody has enough wealth, they're actually not able to spend that in a consumeristic way. So the amount of food you can eat is limited by your biology, right? You can't just eat like 1 million cheeseburgers, even though you can afford 1 million cheeseburgers every day. You can't live in 1 million houses, even though you can afford 1 million houses. You can only live in one house, right? So any capital that's excess of what's required to live a comfortable and maybe even a luxurious life is basically just used by billionaires to allocate that in ways that they want to do it. So most of them are doing it, like Bill Gates, for example. Most of his wealth is allocated in ways to preserve his own capital. So he'll buy safe, or he'll invest in safe companies that will, generate safe returns. Whereas billionaires like Elon Musk are doing it out of passion, right? He's super passionate about renewable energy sources and renewable energy consumption and sustainability. So that's where he holds most of his wealth. He can't own, he doesn't, even though he can afford it, he doesn't need any of the excesses, right? It doesn't make any sense. So that's another thing. One point about luxury. Luxury is basically like, people think, okay, well, he can own a Ferrari and I can't, and that sucks. The only reason you want a Ferrari is because not everyone can afford one. It's a simple cognitive bias for us to assume that something is more valuable because it's priced at a higher price point, right? A Lamborghini, a Ferrari is more expensive than a Toyota, which makes it more desirable for that, but it's a self-fulfilling feedback loop. The fact that you can't get it makes it seem like it's more valuable. It makes you want it more, which makes it more valuable, right? So that's the point about luxury. Only in the last few hundred years we've discovered that economics can be a positive sum game. Throughout most of history, the way to generate more wealth was to do conquests and invade other countries, steal their resources, enslave people, use serfs, etc., and just own land. And that was the ultimate way, because the economy was seen as a negative sum game or a zero sum game. Whereas recently we made the discovery, relatively recently, that 1 + 1 can equal 3. When somebody comes up with a really creative idea, a really good idea, say for example the iPhone, which is what I'm recording this video on, and several other people work to make it happen, everyone ends up with an iPhone, right? Yeah, some were paid more, some were paid less, and some are now able to allocate resources because of the way that they've made their decisions, right, for the next project or the next business or the next investment that they want to do. But essentially, we all end up with iPhones now and smartphones. Like every single one of us has a smartphone. Every single one of us has access to cars, vehicles. The other thing is that we should really consider wealth that's surrounding us, right? You live right now. I can tell you something. I'm not that rich. I live in a building that costs maybe $10 million, and I occupy maybe several $1,000,000 of space, and I pay maybe $1,400 a month in rent to get that. I use a vehicle that costs, get this, I use a vehicle that costs $200 million to get to work, right? It's not a private jet, it's the train, it's the underground railway system. All of those things are so easily accessible for me for such a low price. And I don't realize that basically, like, I'm able to use things that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars for so cheap because of this system. And that's why society and the world has improved so much compared to before we had all these ideas, right? So yeah, I think it's just, I hope that's explained it. My name is John Drake. Thank you if you watched this all the way through, if you listened to it. I hope you've learned something. Please, if I haven't explained anything properly, or if there's anything that, like, you know, you disagree with, please, like, leave a comment and let me know. And that would be really awesome to help me learn. And also maybe I can try to reiterate it in a better way. So either I'll learn something new I didn't know before, or I'll learn how to explain things better. So either way, it's a win-win, positive sum games. Thank you.